Welcome to Cardboard Conjecture. We're a podcast about board games where we have opinions and conclusions formed on the basis of incomplete information. This episode of Cardboard Conjecture is brought to you by these great Saskatoon businesses: Amazing Stories Comics on 8th Street, Dragon's Den Games on 8th Street, MrDiceGuy.com, and Breakout Escape Rooms on Faithful Avenue. Welcome to Cardboard Conjecture. I'm your host, Norm.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Ian.
And on this episode, we're talking about what we've been playing, thinking, and doing about board games. And Ryan, do you want to set us up for the wonderful interview that you had?
Yeah, I had the opportunity of interviewing Travis Jones, the designer of the new hot game coming out very shortly, Pendulum by Stonemaier Games.
Cardboard Conjecture is proudly sponsored by Amazing Stories Comics on 8th Street in Saskatoon. They are the winner of the Joe Shuster Award for Best Comic Book Store in Canada, and they were also nominated in 2016 for the U.S. Eisner Spirit of Comics Retailer Award presented at Comic-Con. Amazing Stories' amazing collection of comic books, board games, puzzles, and collectibles can be found in their store or on their new online website. And we are back. This is Cardboard Conjecture, and we're going to talk about what we've been playing, thinking, and doing. So, Ryan, I'll get you going on this one. I see that you've got a game that I've always had my eye on, but I haven't even started researching it. So.
Sure. Well, this is actually a game that sat on my shelf of shame there for a long time. I had purchased it, unboxed it, had everything ready to go, and then I don't know why I just never ever got a chance to play it physically. But then I saw on yukata.de they just released a digital implementation of it, and this is a game called Hadara, designed by Benjamin Schwer. And in North America here, it's published by Z-Man Games, or Asmodee. I guess I should just say Asmodee, because then that covers everything these days.
Big umbrella.
But Hadara is, I'm going to put it in the same vein as kind of like a Civilization Light builder, but more in the vein of like a Seven Wonders type of game. It's everything is card-based.
Cool.
And what you do on your turn is you just literally, there's 5 different resources that you can collect. And what you do on your turn is you pick up 2 cards from a certain pile. And then what you have to do, you have to make a choice. You have to discard one, and then you either have to play the other card, or the other card can just turn into money for you. So much like Seven Wonders, you either can play it or you can discard it for the money. And what you're going to do is you do this around. And then there's a second part of the phase. Now all those cards that got discarded now become draftable by all the players. So now you take turns and you draft all the cards that just got discarded. So all the cards that were in the game are in the game. When you discard something, it can be actually picked up by another player. And all these cards do is they just increase increase military, increase civilization, increase income, increase all the different types of resources that you can gather. And yeah, you do 3 eras, much like Seven Wonders. Things get much more expensive over the course of the eras, much like Seven Wonders, but it plays very differently. It's not a pure drafter like Seven Wonders, where you start with all your cards and then you just pick and pass. This one's got a little bit different drafting mechanism in play. I only mentioned that I was playing this online because I just thought, hey, it's a really kind of cool game. I don't know if I like playing it online anymore, because Jen and I just tried playing it 2-player, which I might add, it's fantastic at 2 players, not much like Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders is not that great at 2-player, but the 2-player of this is actually really good. I don't like it online because the way the online implementation works is I can see how many points my opponents have all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm playing it face-to-face with somebody, that's revealed at the end of the game. You don't exactly know how well somebody's doing until the end of the game when you add up all the points at the very end. The big reveal. There's no big reveal in the online thing where you just always see, oh man, I'm trailing so-and-so by 5 points. I really need to kind of, step it up. I don't have that information when I play it face to face.
Okay.
So
I've never even heard of this before.
I only got on my radar because a friend of ours, Dave Stevenson from Board on the Air, he mentioned it to me that they had played it once at a Friday night game night, and he really enjoyed it. He said it was he says like that very Seven Wonders like, but this one caps out at 5 players, not 7.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a 2 to 5 player game, and he says it plays very quickly. It's got those civ building aspects where you got like your military track, your income track, and all this kind of stuff, and you convert things into points, or you buy cards to get points and stuff like that.
It's sounding very much like Seven Wonders to me.
Yeah,
very much.
Except for the main difference is that in Seven Wonders you have to draft those resource cards in order to play something later on. This one, everything you play is going to cost you money.
So it's a minor detail that makes it a little bit different.
And the way that you draft the cards.
Okay.
That's really the big difference. The big difference. And you don't have those asymmetric player boards that give you the different abilities and everything like that. I don't know. I thought it was really neat. It plays pretty decently well online, except for now that I've played it in person. I rather play it in person because I don't know how many points my opponents are getting. And apparently in Europe, it's got like a bazillion expansions.
Oh, wow.
And by a bazillion, I mean, I'm just going to pull it up here. 4.
Okay.
But they're not, I don't think any of those are released in North America here.
Well, okay, hands down, if you had the option to play, would you play this or would you play Seven Wonders?
Well, this right now, because I've played so much Seven Wonders
okay.
in my day. But
so this
as a pure
fresh,
drafter, as a pure drafter, Seven Wonders does it better.
But this is fresher.
This one's fresher. It's got a minor. It just plays a little bit differently. It's very hard to explain without actually playing it.
Okay, cool.
So Hadara, check it out. If you like Seven Wonders, you actually might like this.
All right. Ian, do you want to go next? Or do you want me to go?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've been playing a few games lately, and
what?
I know it's been nice.
I'm excited about one of those because I got it in the mail today or the other day.
Really? Well,
yeah.
Okay. Well, which one do you want me to talk about then?
Well, I Glenn Moore. I got the Chronicles in. Yeah. And I have the original too. And I think when you purchased it, we both purchased it at the same time because it was going out of print import.
Glenn Moore is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really good game. It's I like the way that you get your tiles, right? Because it's a moving around the track thing that you do. And you basically you move as far ahead to get any tile you want. All the tiles that are there, you can pick any one you want. But if you go too far up, you're going to be waiting a long time before it's your turn again. So you kind of want to strategically figure out what should you take that still keeps you going without taking you out of the game for too long. And oh yeah, it's a really good game.
I really like that as a mechanism in certain these rondelle-ish games where you can go far ahead to get what you want, but you're going to wait. Right. That's very like Takedo.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Does that very well. Another game that I play is called Heaven and Ale. It's got a very similar mechanism.
I played that with you. Yeah.
You can just jump straight ahead, but you're gonna wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's very easy to catch on to, right? Like just pick a tile you want to go to and then you wait till it's back to you again. It's something that's really easy to catch on to.
Have you played the original?
Sorry?
Have you played the original?
This is the original I'm talking about.
Okay. So you don't, we're not talking about Chronicles at all?
We aren't.
Oh,
no. Because they decided to name it Glenmore 2, and there's no way I was buying a game called Glenmore 2 when I didn't have Glenmore 1.
Oh, we're back to that past episode of I'm not jumping into a series.
No.
Except for Star Wars Episode 4. Anything, yeah. Okay. So, hey, the original. Yeah, absolutely. I love the original. It's just
Yeah.
nice and clean, and that whole mechanism. And
I like the way
and the triggering.
Yeah, I like the way how you trigger your tiles by where you place them. You get to trigger all the ones that are around it.
Right. The one thing that's not very intuitive is the scoring method, but I like that because it's different than the way you score in other games. Other games, you score this many points for having this or whatever. But in this one, it's all comparative and relative to all the other players. You score this many points if you've got 3 more than whoever has the least amount of whiskey, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've got 3 whiskey and Brett's got 1 whiskey, I get 2 points or whatever it is. So that's an interesting aspect too that I think
what I like too is when you're building your town with that idea that you can trigger a lot of things. You don't want to leave a tile deep in the middle where it's like inaccessible to be triggered. So the way that this town grows is so interesting. And I think, I can't remember, but isn't there like a catch-up mechanism or a penalty in regards to how big your town is versus your
if you make it too big. Yeah. If you make it too big and somebody's got a really small town, then you're going to lose points. You're going to get penalized. So,
Cool.
Glenmore is a great
good
game.
Matthias Kramer, right? I think.
I believe.
Yep.
Yes, I believe so. And you just got the new one?
I just got the second. So
okay.
I guess I did it in the did I do it in the proper order?
Yeah, you're okay.
All right.
You're fine. You have 1 and 2. You're good.
You have the German version, don't you, Norm?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I have
mine's actually in English.
Is it?
Yeah,
I got the BGG download English translations. It's hilarious. So, but I mean, some of them are pretty obvious. It's like, okay, well, there's meat hanging in the picture. I think that's the butcher shop.
Das Wurf.
So cool. Well, that would be a good game for all of us to play once we get back to the ability to play games together face to face, which is kind of tied into what Ryan was talking about with Yukata and Hadara. That is like, I think Ian and I were talking about the idea that this is great to have this opportunity to play face to face, but I mean to play online. But man, I miss it. The whole playing with a group of people in the same room.
Well, and that's relevant with lots of games on Yukata. They accumulate the points as you kind of like do things. It's not just Hadara. It's all like lots of games. Castle. Well, I guess Castles of Burgundy is a bad example because you do add up all your points as long as you go along in that game.
Mm-hmm.
But lots of the games you always know how you're standing in comparison to all the other players.
Right. Cool. And it's not like when you're playing it in person, it's not like you couldn't figure that out, but you don't, right? Like every turn I'm not saying, okay, Ryan's got this many points, Norm's got this many points. You just play the game, and there's something just kind of freeing about that. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah, that's where people are like the AP people are. That's what they're doing. They're calculating, and then they're trying to come up with their optimal move.
Well, I had the opportunity to actually have some people over. I had the big gazebo. I sent pictures to you guys. Got the big 15-foot by 15-foot screen gazebo in the backyard with a big table in it. And a friend of mine and his son came over, and we had a D&D session.
Nice. So, going old school.
I think out of I'm just going to throw this out there, but I think out of all three of us, I probably have the most RPG experience.
Oh yeah,
under the belt.
0.
Okay, so I'll say I've been playing D&D since the people that are captured in Stranger Things, that era. Since since I was at the Goonies age.
So were you a first edition player?
I was I played advanced AD&D second edition.
Okay, second edition player.
I started out with basically the paper copy with a staple in it that you had to mail order. That was my first that was my first kind of like jump into it. And then when AD&D second edition came out, then went hardcore, and that was basically the system that I used. It went on to third several other editions, but now it's at the 5th edition with an amazing team of like writers and designers adapting all these things to make it a real smooth system. I think just from what I know, the difference between the two now that I'm really deep into the 5th edition rule set is that this isn't one of those like GMT war games where, okay, you rolled this number, now we have to go to this chart, and then now it says that we have to go to this chart to determine you jumped 3 feet in the air, did anything happen? I think that's what crippled it last time. So this time it's all narrative driven, right? This difficulty check, right? If you're describing how you're going to do something, then as the DM, you quickly process considering the realms of the ability rolls that you constructively create obstacles for them. So I just absolutely love RPG stuff. Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun getting back into D&D 5th edition. This episode of Cardboard Conjecture is proudly sponsored by Dragon's Den Games, located in the Louis VIII Mall on 8th Street in Saskatoon. Swing by Dragon's Den Games and let Darren, Al, and the awesome staff help you out in search for great board games, role-playing games, miniature systems, and all of the related accessories. Be a part of their gaming communities that have scheduled events in their great gaming area. Dragon's Den Games, Louis VIII Mall on 8th Street in Saskatoon.
Welcome back to the show. This is our newest segment that we like to be continuing on. Last episode, I guess we should say, Norm had the pleasure to be interviewing Emma Larkins about her newest game. And I reached out on Twitter. And this week, we are going to be saying hi to Mr. Travis Jones. Say hi to the one listener that we're going to have you have here.
Hello, everybody. That's right. They can't see my video, so I'm nodding my head like an idiot. But yeah, hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, Ryan.
I'm a hand talker, so people miss out on everything on this side.
All right.
So if you're in the board gaming community and you haven't been paying attention to some of the hot news lately, Travis Jones here, he is the now published game designer of a new game coming out from Stonemaier Games called Pendulum, which is
indeed
it's all the rave right now. So and this is pretty new. This is actually obviously pretty new for you since this is your first published.
Yes, definitely new for me. I mean, I love the attention. I have much thanks and gratitude for Jamie with Stonemaier Games to take a chance. Because I mean, I hope the idea of the game interests people some, but I'm not naive enough to think that it would be, like on the hotness list at BGG just because Travis Jones published something. I'm very thankful that Jamie, gave the game a chance, and then of course put all his Stonemaier magic into the production quality and the development and everything. So I think that's why it's getting a lot of attention. Then I just hope that. With the attention, people play it and have fun with it. That's what I'm hoping for. So I look forward to people getting their hands on the game and giving it a shot, and hopefully enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've got my little reminder set for whenever the pre-orders open up. I'm going to be because I just introduced you to be. I'm a Stonemaier fanboy. I'm the Stonemaier ambassador for Saskatoon, Canada here. So.
Oh, all right, nice. Cool.
Yeah, so whenever there's a new Stonemaier release, I actually do like a big release weekend at our local game store at Amazing Stories here, which is one of our sponsors.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like sometimes we're able to bring in an early copies, and we sit down for like a weekend and people can play and maybe get like a 10% discount off the purchase or something like that. And what I usually do is I just like read through the rules. I usually try to get a copy ahead of time. And so that I can I'll do like a demo event for everybody.
Yeah, cool.
Ahead of time.
That's great. You're doing good work. It's rare these days, just with day job and other schedules and stuff. It's rare for me to get a game and learn it like reading the rules. I'm so often relying on people just like you who do such great work of mastering it already. I'm fortunate enough to have friends that do that. And so then it's so much easier to just, show up at their house and say, all right, well, teach me this game. So then I don't have to spend time, trying to sort through it myself. It's always easier with a live teacher. So it's great for people to do that. Although I can't do it as much these days.
Oh, no,
To show up at my
understand.
friend's house. Can't just do that unannounced.
Understandable. Yeah, no, well, all three of us on the show here, we're teachers. And so teaching games is like high priority on us. But
Yeah.
I like doing the rules. So, so what we're going to be doing here, by the time this episode releases, so we're recording this. Oh, what day is it today? Today is the July 20th. We're actually recording this interview. This episode is not going to be releasing until August 1st. So, at that point, all the review embargoes are going to be lifted. I believe they're lifting, a week from today.
Yep.
And so a lot
I think it's the 29th, I think is what I heard.
29th?
But either way, it'll be before August 1st.
So a lot of people are going to start getting their hands on some of the content creators. I know right now there's lots of the playthroughs that are the how to plays are kind of out there and all that stuff. And I've consumed it all. I'm all in for this one.
Cool.
So, but what we're like wanting to know here is that this is going to be like the get to know Travis Jones show.
Okay.
So we're going to try to crack open that genius brain of yours and see what's going to make you tick.
All right. I hope you don't find just some dusty tumbleweeds on the inside.
Oh no, because as teachers, we are always so well, for me at least, I'm so invested in the how did it come to this point? Like I'm always so interested in all those refinements and everything, because my calculus lessons, I've been teaching calculus for 12 years now, and every year it's completely different than the year previous because I'm always making those improvements.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm interested to see how Pendulum here has evolved over. I don't even know how many years you've been working on it. So,
I'm happy to talk about the journey, and I love the I love that approach. Like when you guys reach out to me, and I read up on you guys. I think I'd heard vaguely about the podcast before, but hadn't read up and seen any details. And that was really cool when I first looked into it. And I was like, oh, teachers, that's such a cool way to come at games and to think about them in that way. Because I feel like games are such a good tool for teaching, period. But then also, like you said, like with the mindset of a teacher of how you naturally got to always be thinking about how to deconstruct things. And I feel like I do that a lot as a game designer, but I would think, in a certain lens, you get that same approach of what are the little components, how do you understand each one, and then put it all together. And that's endlessly fascinating to me, and it's part of what drew me to game design. So.
Yeah. No, Norman's even done an episode in the past too, where he interviewed some game designers and did that comparison of game design versus educational design. They're almost identical.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
So let's start with the background. Because as I was trying to do some research into the show, I'm trying to look up Travis Jones on the internet, and I keep coming across NCAA and NFL football players for some odd reason. So you have to actually type in Travis Jones Pendulum to actually get any information. So give us a brief synopsis of your journey becoming a game designer. Like, where did you go to school? What careers have you had?
Are you on all the meaty backstory? Well,
I wanted to. Yep, go for it.
No, I was gonna say. So that's interesting. In things people have asked me about the game, I rarely get any questions about my day job, but I do think there's an interesting intersection that got me into game design, especially the specific space with what I do in my day job. Interestingly, I wasn't conscious at the time, but looking back on it, I think there's clearly some parallels. But before I mention that, so what got me into game design really is I don't want to say specifically, but in a sense, it was really the game Pendulum. So Pendulum was the first game that I started to work on. Although compared to what it was when I started, quote unquote, to what it is now, I mean, it's very, very different. I mean, it was a complete mess. Of course, everyone's first game is going to be, you don't know anything about game design. So, the first play would be, there's a core piece that would be recognizable, but so much of it was not good. to use the technical game design term. So it took a long time for me to develop it, and then it really took me. Part of the key process for the learning curve was for me was shifting away and starting to design other games because I made this the first one and then like I said, there was so much that was so bad because I didn't know much about game design yet. So I kind of like set it aside and then got other ideas and pursued those, and I was like, oh, these are so much better. But then I would always come back to the original and tinker with it, and I was like, well, if I do this and I change this could make it better. And so it was a long process. It was like the first idea that came to me was 5 years ago now. So it's really been a 5-year process with Pendulum to get it ready to be released. So definitely a lengthy journey, but it was the original one that got me into it. So I had been a gamer for years and years. I grew up as all sorts of nerdy gamer. I played D&D and Risk and other in video games and all that stuff in high school. But I never really played like Euro board games. I got into that very much. I did play like the really old Civilization game a bunch. Me and my high school friends had a whole thing with that for a while. But I didn't like catch the wave or get into it or hear about it. And it wasn't until like my late 20s, early 30s where someone introduced me to board games. And I was like, where has this been and why am I not doing this? So I took to the hobby really quickly at that point. So that was like 10 years ago now at this point. But I played for many years and never really wanted to do game design necessarily. I've always had sort of like this restless creative energy in my life. I played guitar in high school and had a band and then moved on. I think the D&D was always a creative outlet in high school too. Although I guess I didn't have too much creative going on in my 20s, more just doing day job. But there was always that kind of restless creative energy, like I said. So once I did game design for a while, I think I had a few ideas that sort of started to germinate, but I never really thought about pursuing it. And it wasn't until the sort of eureka idea for Pendulum itself hit in my brain that I really started to pursue it. And that was the idea, and you can read about some of this in the design diaries. But for those who want the audio version, that idea was the idea of the real-time game. So I still remember, as I mentioned in one of the design diaries, I still remember the day that the idea kind of hit me. The morning it hit me was after a day of like a long day of board game with some friends that we had over. We played all sorts of big crunchy Euro games. I think I remember the last one was Ora and Labora. It was a great game. And you can spend a lot of time thinking about things because there's lots of great decisions, all these buildings out there on the board you have to read through. So it was just like so much time I was waiting on friends to take their turns, to have some friends that can be prone to AP, analysis paralysis, as can I, honestly. Full disclosure, yeah. I mean, nothing wrong with that. I'm not shaming or knocking people with AP because I can totally be there and I enjoy that aspect of gaming. So, which was interesting. When I put it in the first design diary, I think I saw some response on the internet, people talking about, oh, this is a game to punish AP people or to scare off people with AP. And that's not really quite the idea because I do that myself. So I wasn't trying to make a game to scare myself off. But the idea was to try to explore the different ways that you can make a decision in a game. And it's the point of the game, the way or the idea behind this version of real time is to, ideally, if it hits the design goal, it's up for people to judge if we did it or not. But the idea is not to just put time on a game and say, go as fast as you can. The idea is, okay, you could take a long time or you can make a quick decision. And which one is better and how do you make the decision of which kind of approach to take, and to sort of challenge you to think about how you think. That sounds weird and meta enough. So is it worth it to sit there and think for another couple minutes for your turn, or could you make a quick decision and just take some known benefit quickly versus taking the time to think about it and to ask the players to maybe think about that trade-off.
Right.
Yeah, not that it's that explicit in the game at all times, but there's just different ways that we sort of try to price in the time aspect of the game. So it's not always just faster is better. You can try to assign value to it, and that opens up this whole interesting space that I thought was kind of new and different, hopefully. As an experience for people to play around with. So it was that idea that got me into game design. It was just that sort of eureka moment that was like, oh, I want to try to make a real-time game where the time is this very different aspect. It's there, but it's not about just going faster. It's about managing and manipulating the time as a resource as part of it.
This episode is proudly supported by the amazing team at Breakout Escape and Board Game Lounge right here in Saskatoon. Using industry-leading technology, Breakout Escape's escape rooms are all 100% uniquely designed by the team, ensuring their patrons have maximum fun while staying safe. As well, they are a fully licensed board game lounge with over 400 titles to select from to ensure fun for every gamer, new and experienced. Be sure to check them out at breakoutsask.com. At Breakout Escapes and Game Lounge, they believe that life is more fun when you play games. Right, because there's lots of those real-time-esque games out there. That's like the one that we play in our house is like Galaxy Trucker. One of our is the only real-time game that we actually own, and that's the time crunch of just pick pieces, put them together as fast as possible.
Yeah.
My brain is going a million miles a minute, and at the end, my ship doesn't look anything like it should have been because I didn't stop to think about anything.
Yeah.
Because I'm just looking at that sand timer. I'm like, it's going down again.
Yep.
So you're talking about like this game is not meant to induce that kind of, I don't know, what do we call it, panic?
Yeah, exactly. And
what did the first? Yeah, what did the first iteration of quote unquote Pendulum? I think you referred to it as like heir to the Empire
was the first. Yeah, it was first name. Yep. Yeah.
So what did that look like compared to like what people are watching right now? What did that look like?
Yeah, I remember many fond memories of the giant mess that it was. So the core like real-time part of the game was still there. So that was the idea that was actually worthwhile and that has lasted, till now, which is why it was worth pursuing as a game. And that is, specifically in Pendulum, you have these 2 rows of action spaces where these timers bounce back and forth between them. So that was always the case. That was really like the first vision I had of okay, what if you had these, these 2 action rows with different areas? You could have different length of timers, so you can make different choices about the time you're spending on actions. And also there's this neat part of the game, I think, that came to me early on that hopefully makes it feel different from real-time games, which is that there's no rule that says when the sand runs out of a timer, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You don't have to flip it. You don't have to do some action or anything like that. That's part of the stress, I think, of the real-time game, where it's kind of like the rules overhead, where the process of the game is tied in with the timer running out, and it's this trigger point. And I think that adds to a lot of the stress. So that was one neat idea, hopefully, again, up for people to judge, but one neat idea from the beginning that was sort of the inspiration of, okay, well, what if the timer were just there and it was up to the players to flip it? And the idea of the game is to give people a natural incentive to do it. Again, I started talking about pricing and time, and I like the idea of using this sort of incentives for players. I guess this is maybe bleeding into some of my background, which you asked about. I studied economics in undergraduate, so maybe some of those terms I'm using sort of give a hat tip to that, but hopefully it still makes sense for non-economists. But but the idea to create this natural incentive for the players to want to flip the timer, but to have it not be required. So you get this very organic feel of oh, am I going to have time to do that? Do I want to take time to do this? And then the timer flips over, and it's not because the game was, the clock was ticking down in the game. It's because there's this natural incentive that the player across from you wanted to flip it over. And it just feels a little different because it feels like all the players at the table are manipulating time, not that the game is mandating time. Even though it works out close to the same way, like mostly there's enough incentive that most of the time timers are getting flipped pretty quickly after the time runs out. But there can still be little pockets where they sit open. And again, the feel of the game, it just feels very different because players are in control. So that was kind of the core of the game that was there, that has lasted all the way to the end. As for the other stuff, oh man, there was so much. Like the original game, each player, this I almost feel embarrassed with how bad this game design is, but it's probably an interesting story. So a lot of, I think, creative types, when you get into game design, you get an idea and then you run with it and you get more and more ideas, and they just sort of start coming and you feel like, oh, this is all so great. and then you put so much crap into the game. It's way more than anyone could process. So the first version of the game, not only was it played in real time, it did have the action spaces, but the action spaces, some of them had like a little bit of text on them because you had to say, like, oh, take one card to do this or something like that, which is a really bad idea in a real-time game. It's not a great idea even for a non-real-time game. I mean, you want nice, clean iconography. If you need to write words to explain what's happening, then you probably have too convoluted of a game mechanic going on. But then each player had their own personal deck of something like 40-ish cards. There was your own personal deck of cards that you went through over the course of the game. You pull a new hand and discard as you played and draw more cards into your hand. So the final version of the game almost, it has some little tiny piece of that. You have these 4 cards because I did like the idea of having these cards that are something not related to the timer, so you can fill your time in between if you want, playing cards and making extra decisions. And that's an interesting sort of strategic choice. You can lean into the cards more if you like more decisions to make, and you can lean away from them if you don't want so many decisions to make. But anyway, so early on, it was a 40-card deck, and then again, each card often had text that you had to read. So people were sitting there in real time trying to read this rules text, which is just a very bad idea.
And they're trying to do it like really, really fast.
Yeah, exactly, right? So they're not only trying to play fast, they're trying to like read rules fast, which was bad design. So that was some of the first aspect. There was, what was there? So the final version has province cards, which have a very sort of standardized flow. Again, the original version, there was these other cards that they weren't provinces, they were called major achievements, but they were all different. Sometimes they had text you need to read. And then there was another display for a while that I put in that was like where you visited the Oracle for these like enchantments or something, and they also had text you'd have to read. It was so bad. It was such a mess. But in my mind, it was like, because I wrote all the cards, it all was made so much intuitive sense. So when I was playing in real time, I was like, oh, that card, that one, oh, this will help me with that. It all made sense to me. And then I play with other people and they're like, this is, I don't know, not know what's going on. And so that was some of the learning curve I had to get over. What's the difference between my experience and a player's experience who is not intimately familiar with it?
When you're talking about like this just reminds me back to my very first calculus lesson in my early 20s. And I wrote it out perfectly. It was like 5 foolscap pages long. Yep. It was beautifully written out. I understood everything that was going on. And I remember I got my first, and then like a student gave me my first question. I was like, how do you not, I just told you. And I couldn't, I couldn't understand the convoluted mess that was on my board.
Yes, absolutely. That's something in many aspects of life, but definitely game design too, of the challenge of getting out of your brain and into someone else's brain. And there's just like a learning curve to do that and to put yourself in other people's shoes. And once you spend some time designing games, ideally you start to develop that muscle, but it's something you've got to pay attention to and you've got to learn, early on. So the first version of the game did not have that. Although I will say, I have one good friend of mine who played the very first versions, and he still looks fondly back on those. And it's like, oh, I love those early ones. I wish the game could have been in that form. He just, he has a demented brain, I guess, and he loved like trying to process all of that information at once. Like he loved that chaos. So.
Cool. Right on. So, okay. So we had that. So we had that version. So now was there kind of like maybe explain to us kind of like the middle ground now, the kind of like the middle of the road version of the game between that early chaos, which actually sounds very fascinating. I'm now kind of like thinking about like, ooh, okay, that's not okay, let's jump to like maybe the middle.
Sure.
So you already mentioned kind of like a lot of the things that kind of you like stayed the same and everything like that. What were kind of some of the tweaks that you made to try to, maybe improve upon that chaos?
So there's this whole process of refinement of cleaning up so much of the game that was such a mess. Like I mentioned, you can't have text on cards. People trying to shuffle these massive decks of cards in real time. I mean, don't get me wrong, you could make a real time game that had some of those aspects that I mentioned. It's just that you can't have all of them together. So I started, pruning the tree back and finding ways to standardize things a lot more, so that not only and it's. I don't want to sell it short. It's if a well-designed game, if you're doing it well, again, not saying that I always do, but I've had plenty of mistakes on my own. But it's not just that you want it standardized or simplified so that the rules are easy to grasp. It's also so that the strategy is easy to grasp. Like it's not just a matter of players knowing how it works, but it's a matter of players feeling like they can take ownership and see a strategy to pursue and execute in the game in the first time that they play. You never want a game that's so complicated and so obtuse that the strategy only emerges after you play it 2 or 3 times.
Right.
More power to you if you can get people to play it 3 times before they feel like they've got a strategy. But you need an enjoyable experience the first time through. And so I think, although I will say, I think the middle ground wasn't quite there on that. I think for me, the middle ground was getting over that first hump of standardizing a lot of things, making the rules cleaner, or the parts of the game cleaner, so that the rules were more intuitive. By about the middle part of the game, it had, like you mentioned, the major achievements, which are now in the final game, are provinces that you conquer. And they're the key engine building aspect of the game. So I always wanted to have that in there. But again, when there are these major achievements, you had to read these different texts. Well, eventually I got rid of the text, but it was still just sort of different cards. They'd have different building costs. They do different, production things or different powers on the bottom. Even when the icons were standard, though, it was still hard to get a grasp of what they did. And again, to have a strategy as these cards went out in this row and then went away as other players grabbed them. And people were like, what is it that I should be going for? But so eventually I standardized those icons to say, okay, let's have this be, a standard format where you've got 4 sides on each card, and so you can tuck it and you can build these different parts of your engine, gold, culture, military. So it sort of ties to some standard resources within the game. And so it got pretty good and got pretty clean. And then I would take it to prototype conventions or cons and things like that. And I play it, and the feedback I got was, it was interesting. It was like the good but not great level. Like people would play it and it wouldn't be a mess like it was before, and they'd say, wow, this is really new and clever, like the way the timers work, that's really neat. And then they sort of nod and say, yeah, that's a really neat game. And I'd say, oh great, it's neat. Is that good? Does that mean I should go publish it? And eventually it sort of was like, well, I don't think people are saying like, this is awesome, like, this is so cool, like not only is it neat, but it's so fun, and I did this and I did that, and people wouldn't talk about it afterwards, about the cool moves and the strategies and compare. There's just sort of this level of enthusiasm you can kind of see in people that you get a sense when the game is really hitting it. And so I say in that middle ground, maybe it wasn't quite there. But I cleaned everything up, and I did have this really great new take on real time. So that was there, even at that stage. And that was always the big selling point of the game, was it was something people always told me, like, wow, this is really unique and different. This is such a new experience. It's not like other games I've played, which was really cool feedback. That was always fun and exciting to be trying to bring to life something that gamers who played, 500 games were like, wow, and all those 500 games that I played, I'd never experienced something like this. It's really different and new. And so that part was always really cool.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, because that's going to jump right into one of my other points that I had on my mumble jumbled mess of notes here. I like the interesting part of the prototyping and the play testing area. You mentioned like people would often like talk about like the things that they enjoyed and that it was very unique and everything like that. Did you have any good constructive criticisms from the playtesting? And if you wouldn't mind sharing one or two of those, because I like the constructive criticism part. Well, what did some people say that made this game, or that you took and said, oh yeah, I can run with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was all sorts of good constructive criticism early on. Some people could like point to and say like, I can't read these cards and make sense of it in real time. Like the early constructive criticism was certainly helpful. Then as it got into those middle stages, I'm trying to think through. I mean, there's definitely lots of times where I got helpful advice, especially like refining iconography and things like that, where people would say, I thought this meant this or this meant that. And why don't you just have a symbol that does X, Y, Z? So that was helpful. I remember like the action spaces as they evolved, there was some sort of early version. A lot of times there's like these obvious things playtesters can see, because as a designer, you took something and it was in one form, and then you refined, you got an idea, you changed it, you moved it over here, and it's like, oh yeah, this would be a great change, but it's like you were never coming at it from scratch like a playtester might. So I remember at one point the action spaces, I've come up with this refined way to make it clear when you've taken an action with your meeple by moving it down. And so I had this clever idea, and I was like, oh yeah, you can move it down to the bottom of the action space, so then it'll be no question about whether you've taken the action. So let me just, I'll put in a little spot in the bottom of the action space. So I put in a little dash line that was kind of very light at the bottom of the action space that people could move down. And at some point, someone was like, why is the difference here just like this little dash line that barely separates the bottom of the box, which has the same art in it? Like, why isn't it just like totally different? I was like, it's because sometimes cool. I'm not the cleverest tool in the shed. So thank you for the feedback. And let's make just these two very separate boxes with this clear arrow in between them, delineating, some of those obvious iconography. So that was some good feedback. And then another, speaking of how the game was sort of good but not great, I actually got some really fantastic feedback on one of my play tests right around that time frame, where someone he designed games before, a friend of mine who's has some design experience and very thoughtful about games. He was a great person to play test with. And he gave some specific feedback around, like when I mentioned those achievements that were just sort of this grab bag of different building costs that give you different powers. Even though there's this refined set of resources in the game and you had some engine building aspect to it, and he sort of vocalized the feedback that I think other people have been feeling of, it's hard for me to make sense of what my strategy is, and I got these achievements, but why? Like, what was I going for? And he was sort of, I wish like the military resource there was more like an obvious action space where I go do the military thing and I get military and then I conquer something, and like, or why don't I use my culture, my influence or whatever to, help with my stratagems and connect to that more. I tried to struggle with the details of what he said versus what I interpreted, but the point is, it was some great feedback that really helped me, again, I think take the game to a much better level where people playing for the first time can get a sense of the strategy of, oh, I'm doing the military thing. I go to the military space. I get the military resource. I conquer provinces. Now I need to get more of the blue victory points, which are tied to my cards. I'm going to go get culture. I'm going to refresh my stratagems and play through these cards. So it made these more like through lines so that people could really feel like the different strategic levers in the game, and they could shift between them much more quickly. Because it's hard to do that in real time, to say, oh wait, I'm doing the military thing. Now I need some gold. I need to get these other victory points. It had to be like really clear lanes that you can kind of shift between. And there's still lots of complexity in how you shift across them. And they're still not completely, 100% clean. There are ways to sort of blend across. So if you have a certain strategy, you can still get creative ways to get the other kind of victory points you need. But anyways, that was some really helpful feedback that really, I think, helped take the game to another one. So those were.
Yeah. So in this part, you mentioned about the victory points, and the final version here has the four, right? The victory point tracks.
Yeah.
Everything like that. Has that part always been right from the beginning too, as that you have to advance on these different victory points tracks to end up essentially winning the game?
Question. So that was not the case. So originally there was two victory point tracks. Actually, there was just one overall track. I think it was called Prestige, and then it's interesting. Like really early on, there was actually this negative victory point track called Disrepute. And the more, it was something that you accumulated with certain actions, and it was a victory, I don't know if you call it a victory point track, but it was sort of like this resource that you accumulated, but to win the game, you had to get rid of it and had to be below a certain threshold. So mathematically it was different, so you'd have to take it down, but effectively it's the same thing. You sort of have these two tracks that you're having to manage. So that was there early on, because I found in a real-time game that it was really easy to just get laser focused on something and just sort of be like, oh, this little trick gets me points. I'm just gonna do this over and over again. And people would sort of get in a rut. And that really, while in a sense they chose to take those actions, it still made for an unfun experience for them. That's part of what you gotta, do as a designer. We just talked about good specific feedback you can give, but sometimes it's reading between the lines of, this person really didn't have fun, even though, and it's because they were making choices that my game led them to do. So they were they felt like they were doing what they were supposed to, but it led to not being a fun experience. You've got to figure out ways that your game may be doing that. So anyway, so early on, I always realized like it's much more interesting of a game if you kind of have to spread your focus or have to juggle more than one trick. If you've got to find a couple different strategies or different action pathways that you've got to go down, that is where you get this really rich, interesting engagement with the game. So it was 2 tracks for a really long time, and then I think around the time that I just mentioned, where I really tried to build these clear strategic pathways, I think it was actually with that is when I flipped and said, well, why do I have these 3 different sort of action pathways that feed to one victory point track? Why don't I break that in 3? So you've got to get the different victory point tracks up, and then the one legendary achievement, which is the 4th track, but it works very differently. It's just a one-time thing that you've got to get. So the idea of having to juggle tracks was there early on, but it wasn't until later where it split into 3, which I think is a much more satisfying play experience because it really sort of gives you those themes that tie in with the actions.
Cool. Yeah, because then one of the next things that I really kind of enjoy seeing from some of the playthroughs already is the asymmetry between players as they're playing, as you got I believe it's the 5 different player boards that are both double-sided. And kind of like the one more advanced version, they all have their victory point tracks are all different lengths of the different ones, minus the 4th one, which is just the one bump. But they're all was that all when you kind of started this shift into like, hey, I'm going to have the multiple victory point tracks? Did they always just start at the same? They were all the same length, and then they evolved into like having different lengths?
Later. Yeah, that was later on, and it was around the time where I came up with the different victory point tracks. Is really when that sort of fired off some of the ideas about asymmetry. The first version of the game, they didn't have asymmetrical characters. When you just had the 1 or 2 victory tracks, everyone just sort of started the same standard kind of Euro game with everyone on even footing. Because I enjoy both kinds of games. I mean, I enjoy games without asymmetry, but I do enjoy games where there's interesting asymmetric characters. And I thought, especially in a real-time game, I think the asymmetry really benefits the play experience because it's difficult to follow every move of another player. There's definitely points of interaction in the game with how worker spaces get blocked, how you're all competing for votes in the council phase, and players that I played with will actually look around and see, oh, this person got a lot of votes, this person doesn't. So there is interaction, but don't get me wrong, there's not enough space to just stare at your opponent's board and say, oh, what are they points that they have, and where are their workers right now, and what exact actions are they taking one after the other. So you can't pay that much attention. So I think that when everyone is on even footing, it gives people this sort of I don't know, like FOMO almost of, you're missing out on like, well, what is he doing? What is she doing? What are the different players doing, given they had the exact same starting space than I did? And how come they're better, or they're doing better this, or I'm doing better than that? So once you have your own character, it alleviates that stress a little of like, well, I've got my own puzzle to solve. I'm still going to look at how my opponents are doing for getting close to victory points, but I'm not going to worry so much about every little move they make. And because I know I need my own unique strategy for my game. So I feel like it fits the real-time experience a lot better. So everyone has, a slightly different character, and there's limited points, control points where you get the interaction, so you don't feel like you're just playing solitaire. But you also don't have to worry about watching every move of the opponents.
Right on, yeah. And you mentioned that council phase. That's the one part that I found was really interesting, because you have this resource of collecting votes into this council phase and everything like that. And I think I heard or read something somewhere along the line that wasn't always part of it, that Pendulum or Heir to the Empire was kind of like just this one really long game where people were just taking turn after turn after turn after turn after turn, and there was like no breaks.
I forgot to mention that
in the action.
When you asked me about how bad the first version was, I should have mentioned that, because that was absolutely the case. The very first version, it was like 45 or 60 minutes of playing a game with no breaks. You just go and go and go. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me that, hey, people would like a break. But that was early on, was like, oh, you just sit there and you'll just play. And at some point I had what I thought was this clever idea where in order to win or something, to get some certain victory point, you had to there was like this action space called like the Winter Festival or something like that, and you had to take all of your workers and stick them on this spot, and it was like the highest timer, like the 3-minute spot. So my thinking was like, well, at some point in the game, you have to put all your workers there, and you'll have 3 minutes. You can like run to the bathroom or something like that, take a break. that was my clever idea, which I thought was so like creative, which was horrible. It just created this confusion where you'd be playing this real-time game, and at some point the person across you would just get up and walk away. You're like, what are they? I mean, I knew what was happening, but other players would be like, where's she going? Is she done playing the game? And it's like, no, she's doing the Winter Festival action. So this is the one time she has time to take a break. You just keep playing your game. It was awful. But I mean, it was creative. It was different, but yeah, not so good. So eventually I was like, no, let's just build in a trigger point that will let everyone just take a break, catch their breath, process. It's not only catching your breath and like being able to go to the bathroom, although don't get me wrong, that's an important part of a game. But it's also the social interaction. You can't chit chat as much in a real time game. I'm able to do it because I played the game a few times, so I can, I sort of can manage my strategy, and there's enough time that I can sort of like talk smack or whatever and chit chat with other players in the real time, but still not too much. So the councils phase is where like when I play with my friends who played it, several times, prototyped or whatever. That's when like we all take a break and it's like we look at how they're doing and how you're doing. You talk trash about how you do it, your game's going on, or just ask, like, oh, what's interesting. It's not always talking trash. Just ask, oh, so you look like you're doing a different strategy. You're really using the cards this time or doing that. So it gives people a break to kind of chat about the game or chat just social stuff too, and just catch up with your friends. So that's part of playing a game, right? So those breaks are an important part, I think, to making it an overall satisfying experience. For sure.
Yeah. And now one of the other things I saw that kind of built into this one is that you don't actually have to play this one with the real time aspect of flipping the sand timers. You also have the separate, I'm going to call it a mode, where you can just track the round with like a little marker and say, oh, yeah, we're at this point now. We're at this point now. Just kind of like, was that something when the game was signed with Stonemaier that was kind of introduced, or?
Yeah, so that was a later development. Yeah, you talk about the stages of the game. So I think it started awful, and then I went through a year or two of cutting it down and getting it good. And then some really insightful, helpful feedback and sort of, further kind of reading through, what players were experienced to get it to where it's finally like, hopefully, a really fun experience playing a real-time game. But then there was still plenty more refinement that it needed to go through. And that was what, basically it was at that stage that I signed it with Stonemaier. And then we did more development, more ways to refine it. Putting it into his blind playtest network got us a lot more interesting feedback and everything on what people's experiences were playing the game without me to sit there and teach them. I mean, I did do that a couple times in order to pitch it to Stonemaier. One of the things he requires is to make sure you've tested your game a couple times with someone else teaching. And so some people need the sort of untimed experiential aspect to master the moves, and some people get it because they hear someone tell them the rule and then they sort of project it in their brain. And So anyway, so people learn different ways, and that's when we realized, okay, we really need to come up with a way for people to learn and be able to play the game without the real-time pressure immediately.
Travis, this has been amazing. I have learned so much just in this short amount of time, just from our brief discussion. People said that there's something here. There's something special about Pendulum. Thank you, Travis, for everything for this. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. No, I've enjoyed it too. I really appreciate you having me on. And thanks for some cool, thoughtful questions, some great discussion.
This episode is proudly supported by Mr. Dice Guy online board game retailer located right here in Saskatoon. Mr. Dice Guy is always stocking the hot new titles, as well as restocking all-time favorites. They even have a ding and dent section for previously played titles. They offer free shipping across Canada on all orders over $200 or free local pickup if you're in the Saskatoon area. Check them out at MrDiceGuy.com. Saskatoon's Mr. Nice Guy is Mr. Dice Guy.
that takes us to the time at the of the episode where we say thank you very much for listening to us. I am your host, Norm.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Ian.
And we will catch you later. We are Bridge City Board Gamers, and you can find us on Twitter at BC Board Gamers, on Facebook, Bridge City Board Gamer Community, and on YouTube at Bridge City Board Gamers. You can also find us on BGG Guild number 3039.